The Cizeta-Moroder V16T. Cizeta built the V16T in 1991 in a small facility in Modena, Italy. The 6.0-liter V6 was constructed by mounting two V8 cylinder banks side by side on a common crankshaft, a configuration that produced 540 horsepower and an engine note that no other road car of the era could replicate. The car was designed by Marcello Gandamini, the same designer responsible for the Lamborghini Countach and the Miura. In the United States, a small number of examples were federalized and sold legally. American owners registered them and drove them on public roads. The company collapsed financially before completing its certification obligations for subsequent model years. The cars that had been legally registered retained their status. New examples could no longer be brought into compliance. The handful of American owners found themselves holding cars that were legal to keep and legal to drive, but impossible to replace through any official channel. Cizeta attempted a revival in the 2000s. It did not reach production. The Lamborghini Countach. Lamborghini introduced the Countach in 1974. It remained in production for 16 years across multiple series. The final version, the 25th Anniversary Edition, was built between 1988 and 1990. Throughout most of its production life, the Countach was sold legally in the United States in federalized specification. American market cars received modified bumpers, different mirrors, and emissions equipment that altered the engine's output and character. In 1988, the United States tightened passive restraint regulations, requiring cars sold in the American market to meet updated side impact standards. The Countach's body construction made compliance modification impossible without a fundamental redesign of the passenger cell. Lamborghini chose to end American sales rather than undertake that redesign. Cars already registered in the United States retained their legal status. New examples could no longer be imported for road registration. The production run ended 2 years later for unrelated commercial reasons. The Vector W8. Vector Automotive built the W8 in small numbers between 1990 and 1993 in Long Beach, California. The twin-turbocharged 6.0-liter V8 produced 625 horsepower in a car that Vector's founder, Jerry Weigert, described as an American fighter jet for the road. Early examples were federalized and sold legally to American buyers. Vector held out the car as a competitor to Ferrari and Lamborghini at a time when neither of those companies was producing anything close to the W8's claimed performance figures. The company's financial position deteriorated throughout the early 1990s. Production became inconsistent. Several cars were delivered in states of completion that buyers considered unsatisfactory. Indonesian conglomerate Megatech acquired Vector in 1993. The new ownership attempted to redirect the company's engineering resources toward a different model. The W8 production ended. Cars that had been legally registered remained on American roads. The company that built them no longer existed in any recognizable form. The Porsche 930 Turbo. Porsche introduced the 930 Turbo to the American market in 1976. It was legal, federalized, and sold through Porsche's dealer network. American buyers registered it and drove it on public roads. In 1980, Porsche withdrew the 930 Turbo from the United States market entirely. The reasons were not primarily regulatory. The combination of the turbocharger's aggressive power delivery, the rear engine weight distribution, and the handling characteristics that resulted from both factors had contributed to a number of serious accidents. Porsche's American legal exposure had become a commercial concern. The car was not made illegal by any government authority. Porsche made the decision unilaterally. Cars already registered in the United States continued to be driven legally. New examples were not available through official channels until Porsche reintroduced the turbocharged 911 to America in 1986 with a revised and more manageable configuration. The 6-year absence became one of the more unusual self-imposed withdrawals in automotive history.
The Ferrari Testarossa. Ferrari sold the Testarossa legally in the United States from 1985. It was federalized, emissions-compliant, and available through Ferrari's American dealer network. The side strakes, the flat 12 engine, and the visual presence made it one of the most recognizable cars of the decade. In 1996, California introduced updated emissions regulations that the Testarossa's engine could not meet without modification. Ferrari chose not to develop a California-compliant version. The car was already out of production, having been replaced by the 512TR and subsequently the F512M. Owners who had registered their Testarosas before the regulation change retained their legal status under grandfathering provisions. New registrations in California became impossible. In several other American states that adopted California's emission standards, the same restriction applied. The practical effect was that a car which had been legally sold and driven in California for over a decade became impossible to newly register in the state where it had been most visibly associated with 1980s wealth. The Dodge Viper GTS-R. Dodge built the Viper GTS-R as a racing variant of the production Viper. It competed in GT-class racing in America and Europe throughout the late 1990s and achieved considerable success, including overall victory at the 24 Hours of Daytona. A small number of GTS-R examples were converted to road-legal specification by private companies and registered for street use in various American states during a period when inspection and registration requirements were less uniformly enforced. Changes to vehicle inspection standards in multiple states during the early 2000s made continued registration of these converted examples increasingly difficult. The specific concerns were the roll cage construction, the absence of certain emissions equipment, and the noise output of the racing exhaust systems. Cars that had been registered and renewed annually in some states found themselves unable to pass updated inspection criteria in others. The legal status of road-converted GTS-R examples varies by state to the present day. No federal ruling has addressed the question directly. The Lotus Elise Series 1. Lotus sold the Elise legally in several European markets from 1996. The car was not initially federalized for American sale. A small number of gray market examples reached the United States through individual importation and were registered in states with less stringent inspection requirements. In 2004, Lotus introduced a federalized version of the Elise for the American market, modified to meet federal safety and emissions standards. The gray market cars that had been informally registered before the official American launch occupied an ambiguous position. Some states had registered them against motorcycle rather than automobile classifications. When those states updated their registration procedures, the classification loophole closed. Cars that had been legally registered under the motorcycle classification could not be re-registered under that category. Owners were left with vehicles that state records showed as legally registered, but which could not be renewed under current requirements. Several pursued individual exceptions through their state motor vehicle authorities, with varying results. The legal status of a given 7 in the United States depends significantly on which state it is registered in and under what classification it was originally processed. The Noble M400. Noble sold the M400 in the United States in small numbers in the mid-2000s. The twin-turbocharged 3.0-liter Ford V6 produced 425 horsepower in a car weighing approximately 1,000 kilograms. American buyers registered and drove examples on public roads in states where the car's specifications were compatible with local requirements. Noble made no significant investment in federal homologation for the American market. The cars that reached American buyers did so through a process that relied on individual state registration requirements rather than federal certification. When the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration clarified its position on low-volume manufacturer exemptions in the late 2000s, the pathway that had allowed Noble examples to be registered in certain states effectively closed. Cars already on American roads retained their registration. The route by which new examples had been reaching American buyers was no longer available. Noble did not pursue formal federal certification for subsequent models until significantly later. The Caterham Seven. Caterham has sold various versions of the Seven in the United States over several decades through a combination of kit car registration, individual state exemptions, and low-volume manufacturer provisions. The regulatory framework governing how Caterhams could be legally registered in America has changed multiple times. Cars registered under provisions that were subsequently revised found their renewal complicated by updated requirements. In some states, the kit car classification that had allowed registration was replaced with a constructor's vehicle category that imposed different requirements. In others, the low-speed vehicle exemption that had covered some examples was narrowed in scope. The practical result was that owners in certain states found themselves holding cars registered under classifications that no longer existed. The cars had been legal. The legal framework around them had changed. Caterham's American operation has addressed these situations on a case-by-case basis over many years. The legal status of a given Seven in the United States depends significantly on which state it is registered in and under what classification it was originally processed. The Ultima GTR. Ultima Sports built the GTR as a high-performance kit car in England and sold examples to American buyers who assembled them and registered them individually under kit car or home-built vehicle provisions in their respective states. When several states updated their home-built and kit vehicle regulations in the 2000s and 2010s to address safety and emissions concerns, the provisions under which some Ultima examples had been registered were revised or eliminated. Cars registered before the changes retained their status in most cases. New registrations under the previous provisions became unavailable. Ultima's sales became dependent on navigating a patchwork of state-level requirements that varied significantly and changed at irregular intervals. The company continued to sell to American customers. The registration process became the responsibility of the individual buyer rather than a standardized manufacturer-led certification.